Hello, and welcome to episode 17 of My True Ghost Stories. For the past few episodes, I've been telling stories about my experiences receiving signs from the universe and from the other side, and what those signs meant for me and my path. And a lot of what I do now involves noticing these signs. And then what I observe from the signs often involves delivering messages to the living from those who have passed on or from the other side. And sometimes these messages take years to be delivered. Today I'm going to tell you a story from many years ago that actually connects to something that happened from last week. About 10 years ago, I was decluttering a bookshelf sitting on the floor. It was a bottom shelf. I was decluttering it. And as I was doing this, a message for my friend Margaret, who works at my church, who I've told many stories about, the message came into my head really fast, and the message was just 3 names: Owen, Penelope, Marianne. And that was this message. They said, say these names to Margaret. And as this message was coming in, I was still decluttering, and this card fell off the shelf. And it must have been between 2 books or something, and it fell into my lap. Like literally fell as if it were pushed off the shelf by an invisible force. And the card was a souvenir. Some neighbors of mine had made a trip to Italy, and they knew that I like the saints, and the card was from a church that they had visited there in Italy, and the card was for Santa Zita, or Saint Zita, and the whole card was in Italian, so I did not understand what it said, but I thought, this might be related to those 3 names that I just got: Owen, Penelope, Marianne. So I put the card up on my refrigerator with a magnet, and I have a book of saints, and I looked it up, but Saint Zita was not in there. And then I did not look it up on the internet. I don't know. I did not know if it was relevant to the message or not, so I just waited to see Margaret so I could tell her about this. Within the next few days, I ran into her near the church, and I said, I have a message for you. And then I got a message for me to say the names in this order. And the order was Marianne, Owen, and Penelope. And then I remembered that sometimes I just get the first letter of a name, and maybe this message was just about the first letter. So I said, the message is 3 names: Marianne, Owen, and Penelope Mop. Now, Margaret had been standing there as I thought through this whole process out loud. And when I said mop, she said, "Mop?" And she began laughing hysterically. She said, "This is unbelievable." And then she proceeded to tell me that at the church, they were having a problem with the housekeeper in the rectory, who we will call Francesca, who they believed was lying about mopping. And this was some daily argument that they had, where they would say, you need to mop this hallway. And she would say, "I did mop." And they would say, "No, you didn't. It's obvious that you didn't. The floor is all dirty." And it would just go back and forth. And so we marveled at this seemingly obscure message. Was it important that I know that the housekeeper Francesca was not mopping? And I said to Margaret, and there's another thing. I'm not sure it's related. I said, this card fell into my lap while I was getting the message about the housekeeper. And it was a card of Saint Zita. And Margaret said, "Saint Zita? the patron saint of housekeepers? The card fell into your lap? And then she said, oh, they are going to love this at work. And she couldn't wait to tell them. And she used a phrase that she used often. She said, this one's going in the book. So after she stopped laughing and she was about to run inside the office, which was right there, to tell her coworkers, she paused. She seemed to remember at that point that Francesca was also a child of God. And she turned back to me and said, we should pray for Francesca. And we should ask Saint Zita to watch over her. And I said, yes, and I wish we could get Francesca to pray to Saint Zita. And that was the end of that conversation with Margaret. So I was satisfied, and I was content knowing that the message had been delivered. And I don't know if that book of stories that Margaret always talked about was ever put together, but I do know that the story of the housekeeper and Saint Zita got around the office because a few people mentioned it to me when I went to church the next Sunday. And a few weeks later, I heard that Francesca had lost her job there at the church. So this message had seemed, very plain and not very moving. I didn't know what it meant. I thought, maybe the guides who watch over the church building are concerned about cleanliness. I don't know. But that did seem to be the end of that experience, and life went on. So fast forward about 10 years to literally last week. I had an appointment in a neighborhood far from my home, and this neighborhood has very bad parking. So I decided to take the bus. I had been feeling a little disconnected from my intuition. It happens. Most of the time, I'm really connected to the other side. But sometimes it feels like my sixth sense is on vacation and I'm not getting any messages or signs. And getting messages and signs can be tiring, so I need a vacation sometimes. And that day, I was feeling disconnected also from people. I hadn't talked to anyone yet that day, so I was grateful when the man at the bus stop put down his phone and started talking to me about the weather. So we talked about the weather, it was cold, and then we talked about the traffic, which was intense. The bus stop was at this really busy intersection, and there was some real gridlock insanity going on. And the bus was late, so he was using the app to tell when the bus was coming. But me, I was using, there's these codes on the pole near the bus stop, and you can text this code and it will tell you how many minutes away the bus is, which I find to be more accurate than the MTA app. So during our conversation, he would check his app for the time and I would check my texts for the time, and we were comparing notes as to how soon this bus was coming. And I said to him, I would have driven because I could have skipped this busy intersection, but there's no parking where I'm going. And he said, I'm just going for a beer. And he was actually pretty funny, and we had a good conversation for which I was grateful. I was being connected to humanity by the universe, And then he said, "Is that yours?" And he was pointing to a spot near my feet. And I looked down, and it looked like a little ornament or a large earring. And it was a crescent moon with a curl on the top. So I picked it up, and I knew that it probably meant something. I often get signs like this, a found object. So the universe started me off with a connection to a person, which led immediately to a connection to the other side via this found object. So I was holding it in my hand, and I looked at him and I said, all right, if the bus comes now, it means I was meant to have this. And, you know it, the bus at that moment turned the corner. And then I said to him, if I get a seat on this bus, then I was really meant to have this. and the doors opened, and there was a bus full of seats. We got on the bus. He said, "Have a good appointment." And I said, "Enjoy your beer." And that was the end of our mini friendship. So now I really had a chance to examine my new good luck charm. So it was a crescent moon with a curl on the top, and I looked it up right away on my phone. And what I found was that, among other things, the spiritual significance of a crescent moon with a curl can represent a connection between different realms, and culturally is widely recognized as a symbol of intuition. And I've linked this article in the show notes. So I said, well, okay then. Lately, I had not been feeling only disconnected from people, but from the spirit world as well, and this was probably a sign that messages were coming. So despite all that traffic and waiting, I did wind up arriving at my bus stop near the appointment early. And here is the next communication from the spirit world that happened that day. I had to walk a few blocks from the bus stop to the office. And while I was walking, there was a breeze, and the leaves were rustling. And I was in the middle of the sidewalk, and as I was walking, this leaf, one single leaf came down, and it hovered in front of my face. It did not keep going down to the ground. It hovered in front of my face like it was caught in a breeze, and it was spinning. So it was hovering and spinning right in front of my face. And I had to stop walking, or it would have hit me in the eye or something. So I just stood there, and this leaf stayed there, spinning and hovering in front of my face. And I knew that this was communication. So I said, okay, I will pay attention. I will listen for the messages. And after I said that, the leaf blew away. My appointment was successful, which I considered to be another sign of good luck from my crescent moon. And I walked back to the bus stop after my appointment, and I texted the code on the pole, and the answer came that the bus was 24 minutes away. I said, 24 minutes? It is too cold to just stand here for 24 minutes. And there was nobody there to talk to. So I said, okay, maybe this is my opportunity to walk around and look for a sign. One of these signs that I'm being told is coming. So I said, let me look for something. And across the street from the bus stop was a 99-cent store. And I said, all right, maybe there's something I should buy in there. I really did not want to do that because my house is already, kind of cluttered, thus all the decluttering. So I went into the 99-cent shop, and there, right by the door, was these weird Halloween snow globes. Yeah, Halloween snow globes. And they were on sale, discounted because it was after Halloween. And I said, well, no, this is not the sign. And I looked around, and there was just more stuff like that. So I just left the store, and I said, okay, the sign must be, in another location. So I decided to walk back one stop before the stop that I was at, looking for a sign. And I saw that it was sunnier back that way, so it would be warmer, at least. So I walked down the sidewalk, didn't see any signs, and I reached the next stop. And I looked for the code on the pole, and I was hoping, maybe that last pole code was wrong, somehow wrong, and the bus is actually only 2 blocks away. But alas, this pole code told me that the bus was 21 minutes away. So I had not really killed that much time in the 99-cent store. And as I was reading this text about the 21 minutes, I noticed there was a woman standing in the street looking down the busy avenue, and she yelled to me. She said, "Are you waiting for the bus? I am waiting so long." So I looked at her and I said, "Oh, it says 21 minutes. So since I had all this time, I went to sit on the bench, and she called to me from the street, "Don't sit on that bench. It's all greasy." And with saying this, she came out of the street and onto the sidewalk, which is probably a good idea because this was a very, very busy two-way avenue with cars and delivery bikes and ambulances going up and down. And we started a conversation. And I was delighted to connect with a second person today. So we, of course, talked about the traffic on the busy avenue, and we talked about the weather, which was cold. And I expressed that I was cold, and she said, "Why don't you put your hood up?" I had a jacket with a hood, and I said, "Oh, I don't want to mess up my hair." And we laughed about that. So there was a lot of time left, and I told her, "I'm going to go to the fruit stand since we have some time before the bus comes." And she said, "Okay." And I thought, I may or may not see her when I get back. And at the fruit stand, I got some really cheap vegetables. I thought, well, maybe that's the sign? Eat more vegetables? But I already knew that. That wasn't really something that the gods had to tell me. So I got back to the bus stop, and I was sad to see that only 5 minutes had passed. I still had about 12 minutes to wait, which I guess, for us New Yorkers, that's a really long time. And my bag of cheap vegetables was heavy, so I decided I'm just going to perch on the edge of this greasy bench. And my friend was still there, and she was safer now on the curb looking down the busy avenue, and she was not in the street. And she watched me perch on the edge of the bench, and she came to perch on the bench also. And we continued our conversation. She asked me, "Where are you going?" So I told her the name of my neighborhood, which was down the road there. And she said, "Oh, I know that neighborhood." And she mentioned the name of my church, and she said she used to work there. And I said, "Oh, really? So you know Margaret?" And she said, her face changed, and she said, "Ugh, I hate Margaret. I can't stand her." I told her, "Margaret's a really good friend of mine." But this did not deter her from talking bad about my friend, and she just repeated how much she hated Margaret. So I just decided to go with it. I said, "Why can you not stand Margaret?" And she said, "Oh, she's mean. She was always telling me that I didn't mop. And I tell her, I did mop. And she says, no, you didn't. And I said, yes, I did." And at this point of her story, I became so excited. And I got this look of absolute delight on my face, like complete giddiness. This was the sign. Not vegetables or Halloween snow globes or traffic discussions. This was it. And my unbridled expression of delight must have seemed very strange to her, as this was not a delightful story, the story of how she was, in her opinion, unjustly accused of not mopping. So I asked excitedly, while also trying to sound just sort of conversational, I said, "What's your name?" Eagerly anticipating the answer. And I got the answer. She said, "My name is Francesca." And I could barely contain myself. I said, "Nice to meet you, Francesca. I'm Jennifer." And in an attempt to sound conversational, I said, "Are you still doing housekeeping?" Her face got even sadder, and she said, "No, not much work these days. It's very slow. I'm trying." And there was no good segue for this. She had not asked me what should I do, but it was all lining up, and the bus was coming soon, and I said, I must deliver this message. So I sort of blurted out, "You have to pray to Saint Zita." And she replied, a little dispassionately and maybe a little alarmed at my level of enthusiasm. She said, "Okay, maybe. I don't know that saint." And I enthusiastically said, "She's the patron saint of housekeepers. You have to pray to her. I know this. I know this." She said, "Okay, all right. I'll pray to Saint Zita." And now she was alarmed. And there was the bus, a half a block away. I took out my credit card, because now you can just tap your card to pay your fare. And I noticed her eyeing it, and I covered the numbers and my name because my spidey sense was tingling a little bit. And she took out a Metro card, which is another way of paying, and the bus pulled up. The doors opened, and she got on first, and she put in her Metro card, and the Metro card machine made this beep that means that the Metro card has no money on it. And the bus driver yelled, "You always do this. You know there's no money on that card. You have to pay your fare like everybody else." So I guess Francesca was a regular at that bus stop. And while the bus driver was yelling, Francesca just ran onto the bus and took a seat. So then I got on and I tapped my credit card while the bus driver looked at me with this exasperated look on her face. And I grimaced, I shrugged, and I found a seat. And I did not sit next to Francesca. I decided that mini friendship had ended and no more good would come from an extended conversation on a lurching bus while I hid my credit card from her. The message had been delivered, and when I passed her on my way to my seat, I glanced at her and I saw this look of sadness and embarrassment. I personally was ecstatic on that slow bus ride home. After I took my seat, I took out the crescent moon that I had been given by the universe earlier. I held it and I gave thanks for this experience and that my intuition was on the upswing again. And I was overwhelmed that it had taken a decade for this message to be delivered. Maybe the universe was waiting for Francesca to come to some new mindset where she could hear a message. And I also realized that the original conversation about the mop 10 years earlier was so that I would know who Francesca was, so I could connect her with Saint Zita. And I hope that she prays to Saint Zita, because one of Saint Zita's qualities, I have looked her up on the internet now, the link is in the show notes. One of her qualities, besides faithfulness and extreme generosity, was she refused to hold a grudge against those who once mistreated her. And I'm guessing, I don't know, I think that Francesca's grudge against Margaret was affecting her life. Now, I don't know why she's not paying her fare, or why she's eyeing my credit card, or why she's not getting work as a housekeeper, but the powers that be obviously want her to pray to Saint Zita, the patron saint of housekeepers. And hopefully she can turn this all around. And I am so honored to be part of this long-term plan to deliver messages to people who need them. Thanks for listening. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a second to subscribe, review, and share it with a friend to help this show grow. And that's all for today. Thank you for listening to today's episode. And if you think your house is haunted, want energy cleared from your space, or need a custom spiritual ritual, I'm here to help. Visit jpclearing.com or email me at jpclearing60@gmail.com. Don't forget to join me here every Tuesday for a new episode. Until next time.